we have no firsthand accounts of the life of Jesus, which can feel a little confusing, but also, when we understand it, can help us discover who we are. Hi, I'm Jeremy. I'm a deep skeptic, also a pastor. Wait, but aren't those books called Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John? Yeah, they are called Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, but those are sort of almost honorific attribution. We can get to that later. But if you read them, what's interesting about them is there actually aren't any first person claims to these stories in the text themselves. There's no point at which they say, I did this. The closest that we get is in the second to the last verse of the book of John, where it says that we believe these things about Jesus, and that we believe that the author of this book was true. And what it appears to be is that there was a group of people who were disciples of John that were sort of gathering the teachings of that person and writing them sort of collectively as a group. And that is not a first person claim. In fact, they actually weren't called Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They weren't named that way for the first 200 years that they were around. Up until that point, up until the year about 180, they were referred to as the Memoirs of the Apostles. And then, most likely, someone in Rome produced a collection that was widely distributed that gave them these sort of honorific authors to say this was Matthew and Mark and Luke and John. And I'm not a biblical scholar. I'm not going to get into exactly why that happened, though that is very interesting information. You can look for somebody like Dan McClellan to tell you all about that. Now, for those people who are biblical literalists, or if you grew up in the sort of high control evangelical fundamentalist traditions of Christianity, this can sort of be earth shaking to discover that these the religious academic consensus is, and I'm not just saying this out of random place that I found on the internet. This is the academic consensus that these were not firsthand accounts. These are not, and it's verifiably true in multiple different layers, right? When you hear that, it can shake things because you say, well, if these aren't verifiably true, if these aren't the firsthand accounts, then how can we trust them? And I get that. It feels like without the firsthand account, you can't trust it, but there's not a lot of firsthand accounts in the Bible in general. But what you do have is that these books, these four stories about the life of Jesus, were around very early on, and they stuck around, which is important. So the people who could have verified, the people who actually were around when Jesus was around, and the people who knew those people, the people who could have called BS on one of these books, they accepted them as being accurate, as sort of reflecting the person of Jesus and the events that they remembered happening. And that's important because even if it's not a first person account, it sort of had the test of the historical body, the test of the actual people, and it survived that test. And so even though it's not exactly first person, there were lots of people who were around that could have called BS on it, could have fallen out of favor, but it didn't. But here's what's actually helpful about that little piece of knowledge. So each of these collections, each of these books, each of these tellings of the stories of Jesus has their own voice, their own thing that they're trying to tell you about who Jesus is. And that's really helpful because it means that multiple perspectives are helpful, multiple perspectives are valid, and that gathering multiple perspectives, multiple ideas can be helpful to your spiritual formation. In fact, that the early church had multiple perspectives, multiple different versions of the story from different people's understanding, from different traditions. They gathered them together and they kept them together because it turns out we need each other. Because the reality is, whatever you believe and I believe, probably half of it's wrong. We've said that before here. And the only way to undo that, to undo the wrongness and to discover something that is closer to right, is to have multiple people contributing to your life, contributing to your own experiences and understandings, giving you their perspective that is different than yours, like you get in these four accounts of the life of Jesus. And so in one way, it's disturbing to people who grew up wanting to take everything literally, and yet at the same time, it should be freeing because it just underscores this idea that we need each other, and we need to have this deeper perspective, these multiple perspectives, in order to really find the presence of God in the world and to increase that presence, that love and grace in the lives of the people around us.